Hi, firefighters. It's Jane Fonda, but I'm actually in Rome making a movie, making the sequel to Book Club, and I'm about to go on set, so I'm in character. But I just wanted to wish you a happy June, and as you can tell, this is obviously not going to be your run-of-the-mill Fire Drill Friday since I'm away. But fear not, this month and next, Fire Drill Friday will be hosted by a profoundly inspiring young woman, Nalleli Cobo, who just last week was the winner of the very prestigious Goldman Prize. Now, I don't know if you're aware of the Goldman Prize, but it's the most important environmental prize in the world. And it recognizes individuals who make enormous effort to protect both our natural world and its communities and its people, often at great personal risk. Nalleli is the perfect example of this kind of leader and the inspiration for all that we can accomplish, when we stand together and demand change. I mean, I think like at age 10, she and her mother had to be put into witness protection because she was so effective at shutting down an oil well. She is an incredible grassroots activist and leader. And at 19, she led a grassroots campaign to permanently shut down a toxic oil drilling site in her community. Pardon the noise, but they're finished building the set. Anyway, the very oil site that was causing real serious health issues for her and many others in her community. Now, Nalleli's going to tell you more about herself momentarily, but I couldn't resist popping in to let you know that you're in the best of hands and that I'm here watching you and that I'll be back the first Friday of August. I really appreciate you being part of Fire Drill Friday today, and congratulations again, Nalleli, for this incredible award. Have a fabulous Fire Drill Friday. I'm so looking forward to the show.
The densely populated Los Angeles region is the largest urban oil field in the United States, producing millions of barrels each year. 21-year-old Nalleli Cobo has been fighting to end oil extraction since she was a child.
Over 500,000 Angelenos live within a quarter of a mile to an active oil and gas well, and those emissions have been scientifically proven to damage our health and our environment.
In 2004, Nalleli's family moved into a South Los Angeles apartment neighboring an oil well operated by Alanco Energy. Toxic emissions permeated the neighborhood and began affecting Nalleli's health.
My nosebleeds got so severe I had to sleep in a chair to prevent choking on my own blood. I developed asthma. I had heart palpitations and horrible headaches. My mom developed asthma. My sister had headaches, stomach pains. So it was a really hard time.
Speaking with her neighbors, Nalleli's mother, Monique, realized that the health issues were widespread. Residents began organizing, and at only 9 years old, Nalleli became the spokesperson for People Not Pozos, a grassroots community group.
I live in front of an oil well, and the oil well has been making me sick.
Nalleli and her mother went door to door, distributing flyers and documenting illnesses. Speaking at rallies and government meetings, Nalleli garnered media coverage and political support that pressured Alanco to temporarily halt operations in 2013.
I didn't need to use my inhaler 3 times a day. My nosebleeds went away. But then we were aware that we weren't the only community being affected by oil extraction.
Wanting to address the disproportionate number of oil wells permitted in minority communities, Nalleli co-founded the South Central Youth Leadership Coalition.
Everyone has the right to breathe clean air no matter their...
We sued the city of Los Angeles in 2015 for a violation of the California Environmental Quality Act and environmental racism, and we won.
Hi everyone, my name is Nalleli Cobo.
By the time she graduated high school, Nalleli had become a powerful advocate for environmental justice. But in 2019, her life was turned upside down with the diagnosis of a rare form of cancer.
As soon as the doctor said, you have cancer, I immediately thought of the signs on Elenco's wall that says dangerous chemicals known to cause cancer, birth defects, and reproductive harm.
Nalleli spent the next 2 years undergoing intensive medical treatment. But the momentum of her efforts continued. In 2020, thanks to Nalleli and the community's years of tireless activism, the Alenco site was forced to permanently cease operations. This remarkable victory has Alenco executives facing over 24 criminal charges for environmental health and safety violations.
When Alenco was permanently shut down, I remember feeling at peace in a way that I knew that nobody in my community was gonna be breathing those toxic emissions anymore. That's historic.
Nalleli's cancer went into remission, and her activism continues to affect change, most recently with a groundbreaking city council vote to ban new oil wells and phase out existing ones. For outstanding environmental achievement for North America, the 2022 Goldman Environmental Prize is awarded to Nalleli Cobo, Los Angeles, USA.
Thanks, Jane, and welcome, firefighters. It's an honor to be joining today. Wherever you're watching, on whatever platform, drop your name and where you're joining from in the comments. I love hearing from you. And to those of you joining us for the first time, welcome to the Fire Drill Fridays family, where we are building community, learning about the climate crises, and taking action to address it. You can see lots of ways to get involved and take action at firedrillfridays.com/take action. Each of you can help our movement grow by sharing today's show so your friends and colleagues can join the movement. Take a moment now and hit the share button. Each time you spread the message and share our action online and offline, our movement gets stronger. For today's show, we will be focusing on the interconnectedness of racial and environmental justice. We'll also be discussing the National March on Washington that Bishop Reverend Dr. Barber and the Poor People's Campaign are planning for Juneteenth weekend, aimed at igniting moral revival to mobilize those directly impacted by injustice. But first, let's have some good news, shall we? Mexican experts have said that 35% more monarch butterflies arrived this year to spend winter in mountaintop forests compared to the previous season. And 2 bills were introduced in New York State Assembly in late May that would place extensive requirements on plastic manufacturers requesting they pay for waste management and increase recycling rates. I'd like to start today's show by introducing myself, telling you all a little bit more about myself and my community and my fight for environmental justice. In the 1890s, the new city of Los Angeles, with a population of 50,000, discovered some of the most productive oil fields in history. It was an oil bonanza without boundaries. Few laws governed oil extraction, and rights were granted to those who could pull it out of the ground first. This oil rush ushered into a period of rampant drilling with wells and machinery crisscrossing the landscape. Oil rigs were so pervasive across the city that the Los Angeles Times described them as standing like trees in a forest. By 1930, the city's population had grown to 1.2 million, and California was nearly producing a quarter of the world's oil output. To this day, Los Angeles remains the largest urban oil field in the US, and thousands of active oil wells in the city are located amongst a dense population of more than 4 million wells. Oil rigs dot the city, but are often hidden by tall fences or structures routinely located within low-income neighborhoods of color. The legacy of under-regulation means that the city required no buffers or setbacks between oil extraction and homes, and 75% of wells are located within 1,700 feet of sensitive land uses. That's homes, schools, or parks. Meanwhile, Many of the active oil wells are in Los Angeles, are in Latino and Black neighborhoods, communities that have been particularly affected by pollution. Urban oil wells have been clearly linked to asthma and other health problems. In March 2020, the tireless organizing culminated in the definitive closure of the Alango drilling site across the street from my childhood home. In addition, Alango executives are facing over 24 criminal charges for health and safety violations. This work spurred the city council in favor of banning oil extraction in the city in 2020. And in September 2021, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to ban new oil wells in unincorporated parts of the county and examine the status of existing ones. Since I was a small child, I endured headaches, nosebleeds, heart palpitations, and much more. I was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 19. And after 3 surgeries and lots of medical treatments, I was declared cancer-free, but I can't have kids as a result. But in the end, despite these obstacles and driven by them, I have led a citizens movement that shut down an oil drilling site across my home and initiated the process to phase out the largest urban oil fields in the US. Permanently shutting down a toxic drilling site in my community that caused serious health impacts for myself and others was an inspiration and invitation to keep fighting. Our continued organizing against urban oil extraction has now yielded major policy movement both within the Los Angeles City Council and Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. I hope my work is an example and inspiration of what we can accomplish when we stand together and demand change. This is a challenging and fragile time for our planet and our democracy. Democracy should be the best tool for advancing climate solutions, but unfortunately has been hijacked by fossil fuel interests, extreme politicians, and corporate greed. Millions of people, especially Black and Brown communities, are blocked from participating because of restrictions on voting rights and the coercing influence of corporate money in politics. The future of our democracy should not and cannot be in the hands of corporate polluters who want to take us back to the Jim Crow era. We can look around and see the time is ripe for transformative change. People across the country recognize that we must demand a democracy by and for the people. Access to public health resources, investment in Black and Brown communities, a move to clean renewable energy and secure health care benefit jobs as we rebuild our economy. Pro-democracy reforms are key on facing all the other issues on our country. We know these issues are interconnected. The environment, economy, education, racial justice, and healthcare are all on the line. The same communities that bear the worst impacts of pollution and poverty are also the communities targeted by voter suppression and criminalization of nonviolent protest and countless other injustices such as surveillance, deportation, mass criminalization, incarceration, and police violence. Democracy reforms are necessary to make progress on our climate agenda of a fossil-free world. And here to help us understand this landscape and how we can get involved are 2 incredible guests, both longtime activists committed to social and environmental justice. Join me in welcoming Greenpeace Co-Executive Director Ebony Martin and William J. Barber III, Director of Environmental and Climate Justice at the ClimateReality Project. Ebony Martin is the Co-Executive Director of Greenpeace USA. As an accomplished leader and justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion strategist, Ebony has over 15 years of experience in the corporate and nonprofit sectors. At Greenpeace USA, she develops the overall strategic direction, representation, policy, resources, communications, and operations with passion for equity and environmental movement. Ebony is a champion for change and change agent for environmental justice and fostering a just and inclusive work environment. Ebony's faith is deeply connected to her pursuit of justice, and she is an active leader in her church. William Barber III serves as the Director of Environmental Justice at the ClimateReality Project. Barber leads the organization's work on environmental and climate justice, bringing a background of scholarship and policy advocacy to bear. His background includes a degree in environmental physics from the North Carolina Central University and a degree in environmental law and policy from UNC School of Law, both of which he has utilized in driving results-based change for impacted communities for over nearly a decade long. In Barber's previous roles, he advised the Cooper administration on how to promote equity and justice within North Carolina's Clean Energy Plan, facilitated campaign efforts to oppose the now defeated Atlantic Coast Pipeline, as well as coordinated participation of the North Carolina's Poor People Campaign as a filing party of the Title IX complaint recently accepted by the Environmental Protection Agency that calls on more of the stringest review of the environmental justice impacts impacted by permitting facilities in North Carolina. Before we get started, let's watch a short video on a project they are both involved on.
My name is Ebony Martin.
My name is William J. Barber III.
My name is Varshini Prakash.
And I am joining the Poor People's Campaign and Mass Poor People's Assembly in Washington, D.C.
I'm marching with the Poor People's Campaign on June 18th.
And I'm marching on June 18th because I believe we need a moral uprising of people.
I am marching because we are facing increasing attacks on our democracy and civil rights. I am marching
because the climate crisis and poverty serve as twin injustices that threaten our generation and generations to come.
I am marching
to build the vision of a country where we all belong.
Our movements must stand in solidarity with one another.
It's time for a moral revival.
Join us on June 18th at the Mass Poor People's Assembly in Washington, D.C.
I was on mute. I'd love to hear from the both of you and welcome. I'd love to hear from the both of you on how you got involved with the work that you do.
Hi, everyone. Nalleli, it's so great to be with you. William, so great to be with you. And hey to our Fire Drill Friday community and family. And also special shout out to Jane. We miss you, but Nalleli is holding it down. So thanks so much for that question about how I got started in environmental activism. And for me, my journey actually started about 13 years ago when my son, who was a toddler at the time, was diagnosed with asthma. And I always thought asthma was hereditary. So when I took him into his pediatrician, she asked me a few questions that I didn't expect. And she asked me, well, where do you live? Are there grass? Is there grass? Are there trees? Is there nature? And I said, no, actually, I live in the middle of two highways. And she said, well, you may want to start to think about the environment and the pollution. And she said, I bet his asthma is induced from the environmental pollution that he was exposed to from the highway and the cars and the fossil fuel pollution that it caused. And I said to myself, you know, our kids deserve clean air to breathe. And right. I felt I needed to do something to make an impact and to make a difference. And when I started to research, I learned Black and brown children were more disproportionately impacted by asthma.
That's right.
And as I did more research, I found out that there weren't many faces like mine in the environmental movement. So like Shirley Chisholm, she said, if they don't give you a chair, you bring a folding chair to the table. And that's what I set out to do. So I set out to do that for myself and for many others like me. And that's how I found my home at Greenpeace. And William, why don't you tell them about your story, because it's very inspiring as well.
Well, thank you, Ebony. Thank you, Nalleli, Fire Drill Friday family. Shout out to Jane as well. Shout out to my ClimateReality family, those who are tuning in. To be in the midst of a time of great challenge, but also a time where powerful movements are colliding, it inspires me. And so just want to say that. But my meander to this work was over the course of a number of years. Of course, I'm no stranger to social activism, full disclosure, in case that was a surprise. Social activism and public service was highly prioritized in my household, of course, you know, under the tutelage of my father, Bishop William J. Barber II, but also under the tutelage of my mother, who I want to shout out, Rebecca McLean Barber, who is one of the strongest people I know. But I came to this work, of course, my background academically, you know, I have a background in environmental law, environmental physics. I wanted to go into renewable energy engineering, but my experience growing up was really what drove me to environmental justice organizing as a whole. I'm a native of Eastern North Carolina. Everywhere I go, I tell folks, I'm a country boy. I grew up in the South. I'm a son of the South, and I'm not ashamed to say it. Grew up in rural areas. And I grew up witnessing the strength, the resilience, and the dignity that manifests in those areas that are too often seen as the front lines or the impacted areas or the most vulnerable communities. My experience growing up was not these experiences of impact. It was these experiences of legacy, of deep community, of deep self-determination, where people had a connection to each other and connection to land that they not only honored, but it drove them. They understood, they valued that. And I took inspiration from those stories just growing up. You know, I remember running the woods of Eastern North Carolina, going fishing, you know, experiencing that lifestyle. It was a part of who I am today. As I grew up and kind of, you know, went to school, I left home early, went to high school. As I went to university, I started to try to cut my own tooth in activism and started doing some research on issues that were near and dear to my community's hearts. And I started getting into the notion of environmental injustice. First, the history, of course, North Carolina being the birthplace of the Warren County protests of 1982. Shout out for this year being the 40th year anniversary of the launch of the United States Environmental Justice Movement. But I did that research. Then I started looking at different polluting issues that were happening in the state. And I started to put two and two together and developing this knowledge that when you talked about pollution, it was directly threatening the communities, the experiences, the values that I had seen growing up. One of my most pertinent memories was when I was in undergrad. I was wrestling with what I was going to do with my degree because I was in environmental physics, which is this abstract subject. Nobody knows what it means. What are you going to do with that? How are you going to help somebody? Please, you know, so I was wrestling with that. But an opportunity came up where the North Carolina Poverty Tour was hosted. Now, Ebony, I've told you this story. Nalleli, I'm going to tell you today. The Poverty Tour was a joint project of the North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP. My father was president at the time, and the UNC Center for Poverty. This tour came about as a direct response to one of our state legislators going on record and saying in 2012 that he did not believe extreme poverty existed in the state of North Carolina. In 2012. So just dismissing the realities of a couple 100,000, if not a couple million people, North Carolinians. And so these groups came together and said, no, you are not going to commit what they framed as attention violence and erase the experiences of people, North Carolinians, our fellow citizens who are living this day in and day out. So what we're going to do is go to some of the most abject regions of poverty in the state, get their stories, put it on record, and then bring it back so that our state decision makers had to wrestle with it. Sounds similar to what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. But one of the stops on that tour was a small town called Navassa, North Carolina. Navassa is right outside of Wilmington, for those of you who are not familiar. It's a small town in Eastern North Carolina that, like I said, for me, I'm a country boy. It pulls at the heartstrings. Green space for miles. The Cape Fear River cuts through it and serves as a deep, natural deep sea port. It was once a vibrant community of actually African-American community in the rural eastern part of the state. This community, however, was poisoned by a wood processing facility that came in and poisoned over 600 acres of land in the heart of the community. And while they did offer a few jobs, it was in no ways the same level of scale to trade that off for the impact, the devastation that happened in that area. So we went to that community. We talked to those people. We talked to the community members. We talked to leaders who were trying to redress that harm and that legacy of impact. And when I saw that, when I witnessed that, like I said, I had been wrestling with what I wanted to do. It changed my trajectory. And I put two and two together, and I recognized that those instances of environmental injustice, environmental impact, were not isolated. This was not an isolated event. It happened too often, and it happened, or it was unaddressed too often. And so at that time, I committed myself to say whatever I could do to try to redress some of that harm and help holding corporate interests accountable. I wanted to do it. So I started from the environmental physics degree, which you all have given me a little heck about, looking at this notion of law school and focusing on environmental law and policy, and took that up as my career. And then there started piecing together additional pieces of the puzzle, including the impacts of the climate crisis and how it was hitting Black and brown communities, communities of color, rural communities first and worst. I started understanding concepts like energy burden, energy insecurity, and how it compiled on existing disparities, in those communities, and really just went down this cascade of understanding how the environment served as the foundation of some of our worst disparities in society. And I'll close, this quote is something that I've carried in my heart, and it's something that reflects my experience. James Farmer Jr., who was a civil rights leader of the 1960s, actually the founder of CORE, he said that whatever we hope to do for civil rights, whatever we hope to do for voting rights, whatever we hope to do for the fight against poverty would be for nothing if we did not save the environment. Because we would all know the brotherhood of extinction.
Wow.
And so that quote in many ways reflects my experience coming into this work, not just as a singular issue, but understanding how it manifests on all of the issues that concern the communities that we care about.
Wow, that is such a powerful quote. I'm going to need you to text me that, because that...
We can do that. We can do that right now.
Yes. But before you text me that, I do have another question for you, William. Can you tell us more about the Poor People's Campaign and the Juneteenth March and how people can get involved?
Absolutely. So, in 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many others called for a revolution of values in America. This was directly connected to the beginnings of his philosophy that you folks have heard in 1963, where he talks about the triple ills that were plaguing America of racism, militarism, and poverty. When he talked about this revolution of values, what would later become known as the Poor People's Campaign, the groups and the supporters were looking to build a broad fusion movement that could unite poor and impacted communities across the country, looking to put the alarm, set the alarm for the country and for America that the trajectory it was going down, ignoring the plight of poor people at the base of the country, was a trajectory that would be devastating for the entire country. And he did that over almost 50 years ago now. Their name was a direct cry from the underside of history, the Poor People's Campaign. Today, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, has really picking up that unfinished work. My father, Bishop William J. Barber II, and Repairs of the Breach, and Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris of the Cairo Center, shout out to her and that amazing team, have picked up that work in the legacy of Dr. King and are seeking to continue that coming together of people to confront what they have called the interlocking evils of the militarism, the systemic racism that King talked about, the poverty, but recognizing the shifting times, adding ecological devastation, climate crisis, and what they have called the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism, which essentially removes all the morals from our policy and focuses us on only talking about religion or morality as a way to beat people over the head and not talk about how do we do for the least of these. And so the Poor People's Campaign today recognizes that the nation is at a critical juncture where we need a movement that will shift the narrative, shift our politic, because we are in an intersection of crises. And our movements must understand that we have to stand in solidarity with one another, not as a matter of just being the morally correct thing to do, but as a matter of political necessity. So ClimateReality, Sunrise, Greenpeace, others in the environmental and climate movement are coming together on June 18th, because we know that any nation that ignores nearly half, because when we talk about the current state of poverty, nearly 140 million people in the United States alone are poor or one emergency away from being poor. That's nearly half of the country.
Yeah.
Any nation that ignores nearly half of its citizens is in a moral, economic, and political crisis, to directly quote. And so we're working with the Poor People's Campaign team to show that we understand the intersections of climate and poverty. We're working to show that our movements and organizations are standing together in a new model of solidarity. And we're working to put our decision makers on notice that this is an urgent moment for action, not rhetoric, but action that benefits the vast majority of our citizenry.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Ebony, this next one is for you. Garbage truck, sorry.
There goes that pollution.
Yeah. Always the worst timing. Given how many organizations are focusing on...
It ain't gonna stop us. It ain't.
Yeah. Okay, it's gone. Given how many organizations are working on democracy issues, what distinguishes Greenpeace and what do you guys bring to the table that no one else does?
Well, you know, that's such a great question, because actually our democracy should be our best tool for advancing environmental solutions and for advancing any solution where justice is missing or justice is not seen, because we know that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so our democracy should actually be the tool that we're using to advance justice. But this is why we're marching, and this is why we're coming together, because we know that our democracy has been hijacked by corporations and politicians who are taking money from these corporations and are instead beholden to the corporations and to this money instead of doing what's best for their communities. And so that's why we're marching, because we are gathering together to stand up to say, like, we're tired of this and this has to stop. And the thing about Greenpeace that sets us apart is that for 50 years, we have been speaking truth to power. For 50 years, we have been doing this. This is core to who we are. This is in our blood. And, you know, I myself have been a rebel and have always spoken truth to power and got myself in a bit of trouble. But when I came to Greenpeace, I found my people, I found my folks, and I found the folks that we don't back down. And we're a politically independent and a financially independent organization, which means we don't take money from any politicians, any corporations, anyone. We stand hand in hand with our supporters and our donors. That is who propels us and who we get our mandate from. And our mandate actually is that we do what science and justice demands at the moment. And science and justice is demanding at the moment right now that we have a moral revival. And so that is why we're marching. And that is what Greenpeace brings to the democratic space, that we want to ensure that our democracy is actually working for the people.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I am also a rebel, and I'm glad we found each other. We found our people, girl.
And we're about to take over.
Ooh, it's gone. The world should buckle down. Both of you, why is it so necessary that people understand the interconnectedness of racial and environmental justice? Like the entire topic of today's show.
Ebony, I can jump in there.
Yeah, go ahead and get us started.
I'm gonna do a little history lesson, right?
Give us some history. Teach the people. Teach the people.
You know, as a matter, it's an excellent question, Nalleli, and it's so critical to where we are, you know, in terms of our movement realities and our issues of concern. You know, as a matter of global reality, the climate and environmental crisis and the fossil fuel industry together drive injustice around the world, hitting the poor and the most vulnerable the hardest. That's including poor communities, communities of color, communities on the front lines of this crisis. This climate crisis deepens existing inequities. It compounds on already existing inequities of racial disparity, of poverty, of the blockage of access to voting rights, of gender equality. It compounds on every form of injustice that I say often we've perfected as a society, and I say perfected because too often these disparities have been the results of intentional bad decisions. So, you know, fossil fuels and the climate crisis can be conceptualized as these evil twins of injustice that impact poor communities and communities of color first and worst. And the great hypocrisy of that is that these same families are the ones that have done the least to build the fossil fuel economy and to actually create the climate crisis. But they consistently suffer its most harmful effects. It looks like the fact that across the US and around the world, fossil fuel developments like refineries and pipelines that poison the air, poison the soil, but also contribute to a global climate crisis, where do they get built? They don't get built in majority white or more affluent parts of town.
Right, that's right.
Decades of segregation and bad policy, discriminatory housing and industrial policies mean that this infrastructure consistently and overwhelmingly is built near low-income families and in communities of color, no matter where in the world that you go. The great travesty of that is that it contributes to a climate crisis that threatens all of us. Every one of us. And when you talk about, you know, why it's so important to recognize this intersection, go back to what I said, you know, that it's intentional bad policy decisions. Take really quickly to walk through the history of redlining, which is a concept that we all understand and know and are familiar with in environmental justice organizing. We know redlining was a policy during the New Deal era by which the federal government, in conjunction with efforts to address a national housing shortage, developed what was essentially a series of maps that were color-coded to indicate to banks where it was safe to insure mortgages, areas where it was safe to lend to American citizens. Most of us know that this policy had a clear racial disparity, as places where high populations of Blacks or immigrants, whoever was deemed immigrant at the time, were those areas were deemed too risky for banks to lend to. Additionally, there was a document that further explicitly stated this, entitled the Underwriting Manual, that established explicitly segregationist policies as a part of those recommendations, saying that incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities, meaning that Black and immigrant groups at the time should not be granted access to the same type of loans that were helping to increase access to housing for an emerging American middle class. Most of us know that history. Now, translate that today, this had devastating long-term economic effects, including reducing in mass the opportunity for Black, brown, and immigrant communities to become homeowners and severely kneecapping the ability for those communities to accumulate and generate wealth. Because one of the primary mechanisms by which American families today have generated their familial wealth was through generations of home ownership. And when you look at the current racial wealth gap in the country, African Americans have only about 5% of the wealth as compared to white counterparts. And most of this disparity can be directly tracked to the fact that Black and brown families were prohibited by federal housing policy in buying homes.
Yeah.
Poverty lens, right? And the racial segregation lens. Now we add in the environmental lens, which is often not talked about. That underwriting manual that I mentioned earlier made an additional recommendation that, and Ebony, you'll hear this in a way that only someone like you can, highways would be a tool in separating Black and immigrant communities from white neighborhoods.
Yes. Yes.
And earlier, Ebony, that highways today are some of our greatest and most significant sources of air pollution within communities of color.
Yeah.
With your son that drove you to this activism. And beginning in the early 1930s, highways were preferentially constructed through Black and brown communities across the nation. Entire communities were actually bulldozed.
Yes.
Third placement of our national highway system. Communities like Freedmanstown in North Dallas, Texas, West Belford in Houston, West Oakland in California. And today, we know that highways, to bring it to the environmental impacts, are some of those significant sources of air pollution. The same communities that were redlined are now being disproportionately exposed to vehicular air pollution. According to a recent study, Inequitable Exposure to Air Pollution by the Union of Concerned Scientists, African Americans are exposed to 34% more vehicle air pollution, Latinos exposed to 26% more, and potentially surprisingly, Asian Americans in redline communities were exposed to 36% more air pollution. But the environmental impacts didn't just stop at air pollution. The placement of the highway systems in proximity, really not even in proximity, through and over.
Through towns, yes, our communities, yes, directly through.
Opened the gate to community disruption and the beginnings of continued disproportionate exposure. How? These highways served as channels of commerce, along which big industry sought to begin development. So polluting entities that were looking to place their detrimental operations in areas that were both near these channels of commerce, but also did not possess the political or financial capital to offer significant resistance. And lo and behold, this happened to be the same communities, poor communities, communities of color, immigrant communities, that because they were kneecapped in building that wealth, as we said, by being shut out of the home ownership process, were now economically and politically vulnerable to additional industry encroachment. So we see the beginning of this feedback loop of inequity that is put in place, and it still exists today. And that's why I'm so adamant in my activism that I don't say that frontline communities are victims. There are areas and people that have been victimized by intentional bad policy decisions.
Yes, yes. Dr. Bullard even said the most powerful predictor of pollution is race. Right. It's not income, it's not property value, it's your race. So they specifically target our community with projects that they know will increase pollution in our areas. So it just goes to what you're saying, like, yeah, this stuff is facts. It's there's data.
It's data. And then, sometimes we get commentary, well, why don't, frontline communities just kind of move away from the pollution? Has anyone ever heard that? I've heard that. You have to recognize that feedback loop has taken root, because of that widespread lack of access to historic wealth. Communities don't have access to resources to relocate. Not only because they are locked into those areas generation after generation after generation, we see the effects of comorbidities begin to take place. Higher exposure to air pollution over the course of generations, and lower exposures to green space, because highways, factories, and industry, they're not made out of grass and trees, they're concrete, right? They're metal, that means higher morbidities from asthma, from respiratory disease, deaths from extreme heat, everything that is made worse by a global climate crisis. And now, to be fair, we do see occasionally you see an instance of a success story of where a family or a generation is able to break the cycle, relocate, and see a better existence. But too often, that's the exception. And it is nowhere near the scale of disruption that one bad policy almost a century ago catalyzed. And to quote my grandfather, now my grandfather, don't tell nobody, but he used to play a little pool. He used to hustle a little pool. Just y'all. But he used to say that if you're shooting pool and someone tips the table on its back legs and asks you to take the shot, occasionally you just might make the shot. But the proof of the occasional shot doesn't mean that's how you're supposed to play pool. The proof of the occasional success story from frontline communities doesn't negate the fact that there is something wrong with our policy.
That's right. That's right.
Mass has locked these communities into that feedback loop of impact.
I could not agree more with both of you right now. I mean, William, with people moving, I know I've heard that one too many times, and it's always not the solution. If my family were to move, another family moves in, never ending domino cycle. It's the wells or the factories, the highways that should move because the communities were there in the first place.
Right.
But we could talk about this all day. So I just want to ask William one quick thing. We've talked about how people can support and show up for the march, but if someone's not able to physically show up and march with us, how else can they support?
Absolutely. So we're going to be offering live streaming opportunities, I believe, across all of the platforms represented here. So Greenpeace, Poor People's Campaign. You can go to poorpeoplescampaign.org and look to find where your local watch party may happen. Also get access to those live stream links. Also, I want to remind people that the June 18th march is only the beginning, really the continuation of this movement. It is not the culmination. It is not the end of what the Poor People's Campaign will be doing on the ground. It is really a launch where the campaign will be doing what Dr. King said in the 60s, going back into communities and continuing to build this cross-issue, cross-movement, cross-community infrastructure as we continue to demand that our country is responsive to the urgent need and the urgent realities of its 140 million poor and low-income Americans and citizens, our brothers and sisters right here in the United States. So there will be many opportunities to continue to engage, not only on the issue of the Poor People's Campaign, but continuing to drive home this narrative of how poverty, climate crisis, and the crisis of our democracy are all interconnected, and how we must continue to advocate and step up and lead in this moment in our various capacities, because this is an urgent moment. It is our own generational urgency of now. But again, poorpeoplescampaign.org to find more information. And for those who will join us, we'll see you on June 18th.
And we're calling everybody, every movement. We cannot do this alone. We need everybody from every corner of the country to come together so that we can call for this moral revival, because we know we are the only ones that are going to enact change, and it's on us now. So yes, join us on June 18th. And if you can't, go to the website so that you can stream us live while we're there as well.
We will be there. Ebony, you have over 15 years of work in, you've done everything in this realm of work. So I'm curious if there's a story that you carry with you every day.
I think the story that I probably carry with me every day is my children and wanting a better life for them. I know that, every parent's dream, and Nalleli, I know this is your parents' dream as well. We want to leave our children with something better than what we found it. And it was devastating for me to hear that my son had asthma. It was devastating at night to kind of hear him wheezing. And it's devastating to know that you just don't have like a medicine that you can give your child to automatically relieve those symptoms. It was devastating when I was on the phone with the insurance company and asking, I need this amount of albuterol, and no, that's not what your insurance covers. Really? Is that really the future and the hope that I want to leave for my children? No, I have to make a difference. And not just for me, it's for all of our children, every child. Even what's going on in Buffalo, what's happening in Texas with the NRA has our whole democracy tied up. Is that really what we're going to settle for and just allow that to happen? These are the stories that I carry with me, and these are the stories that motivate me every morning to get up and to continue to do the work that we do. And we can sit back and feel helpless, but my father taught me hope is having only positive expectations, and faith without works is dead. So I can't have faith and hope if I'm not doing the work. So that's why I'm up every day, giving it my all. Just like you and just like William. I
have no words. That's beautiful. I could not think of a better closing for this show, honestly. That was amazing. Ebony, William, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspectives and insights. I had an amazing time chatting with you. Hopefully I will see you on June 18th, and we'll be marching with our fists in the air.
See you on June 18th.
Yeah.
Do it, guys.
All right.
As we've talked about, we only have a handful of years left to reduce the power of fossil fuel companies polluting our communities and democratic systems before we find ourselves at a catastrophic point of no return. It is critical that we fix our broken democracy. There are a handful of extremist politicians that are busy putting up barriers to silence our voices because of how we look or where we live. This must stop. The Poor People's Campaign, joined by many other countless organizations, will assemble and march on June 18th, 2022. Because any nation that ignores nearly half of its citizens is an immoral, economic, and political crisis. There were 140 million who were poor or one emergency away from economic ruin before the pandemic. Since March 2020, while hundreds of thousands of people have died, millions are on the edge of hunger and eviction and still living without healthcare or living wages. Billionaire health and wealth has grown by over Billionaire wealth has grown by over $2 trillion. This march will be generationally transformative declaration of the power poor people and low wealth people have, and our moral allies to say that this system is killing all of us, and we won't be silent. We can each play our part. You know the drill, friend. To make change, we need to take action. You can sign up and attend the march or support in many other ways by going to firedrillfridays.com/take action. Lastly, I want to end on a somber note. These last few weeks have been brought by a string of horrendous mass shootings in our schools and public spaces. It's simply devastating. There are not enough words to express the profound sorrow, grief, and anger that arise as we grapple with this poison infecting our society. Our deepest condolences go out to those who have lost loved ones and to those communities that they are and were a part of. Let us each remember them as fighting for a world that is more just and safe. Please hold each other close. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an honor to host Fire Drill Friday. I hope you all have a beautiful weekend, and I'll see you in the street.